Welcome to Above the Table, YouTube's best home for all things tabletop and fantasy. I am Christian Hoffer. Today I am joined by my co-host Hannah Adkins, and we are joined by a very special guest. You know, you've definitely played at least like 10 of his games. I am joined by the one and only Richard Garfield, and today we are going to talk about Half-Truth, Second Guess. So, obvious first question, what exactly is Half-Truth Second Guess?
Half-Truth was a trivia game that was published a few years ago, and Half-Truth Second Guess is a new edition of it. The spirit of the trivia game is that anybody can win even if they don't know too much about trivia. And so that's what it's designed to do.
What drove the decision to make a standalone sequel to Half-Truth, and when did the work begin on Second Guess?
Well, we very shortly after Half-Truth was published, we began working on questions for an expansion. The only question in our mind was what we wanted to do with those questions. And making it a standalone makes a lot of sense because that way people who haven't gotten the original Half-Truth still have a game. And so what we've done with it is we've also provided a more streamlined way to play. So Half-Truth was a game where you would play for maybe an hour and a half, sort of a typical game length for that sort of game. But we saw that after people finished that, they often spent a lot of time sort of just looking at questions, as one will do with a trivia game. And we thought it might be good to provide a faster way to play so that they could string together games instead of just sort of peruse questions afterwards, not quite being up for a second game.
Absolutely. One of the descriptors that we received for Second Guess says that it takes all of the features players loved about the first Half-Truth game and then adds additional ways to bring fun to game night. There's a doubled player count with 12 players total now and team gameplay capabilities. Can you talk a bit about the team gameplay aspect and how you feel this improves upon the Half-Truth experience overall?
Yeah, when you're playing a party game, oftentimes there's there's more than 6 people floating around. So increasing the player count is good, and there's a lot of ways to do that. You can have everybody play individually, or you can have them team up. In trivia games, it is often fun to work with a partner because they cover areas. It's a very good partnership game. You really feel like everybody's contributing, which is not the same as all partner games. Sometimes you feel like somebody's the armchair general, so to speak. And but in a trivia game, all the players on a team will have an input, but it's a fun way to play. And so we were doing that anyway. And I don't think there's any trivia games where we played both. I haven't played both teams, and so we wanted to provide an official way to do that with our game as well.
The team aspect's interesting because Hannah and I are actually part of one of the best trivia teams in Columbus, Ohio. We have an entire shelf full of trophies that say that. I did want to ask really quick about like the specific. It's true. We've won like 30 rounds or something like that. We just won. We just won like a Godzilla trivia last week. It was impressive, and it came down.
That's marvelous.
Thank you. I'm humbled.
I love trivia, and it's a wonderful hobby. And in fact, that's what got me started on Half-Truth. When I began the design on Half-Truth, I did not love trivia. It was okay, but I didn't really thought that it warranted, which is unlike me. Usually, I try to play games outside of my comfort zone, my like zone, and learn what makes them fun. And I realized I hadn't done that with trivia, And what prompted that was Ken Jennings' book Brainiac, which is a marvelous book. And if you guys are into trivia, you should try it. It completely swept me away with Ken's love of trivia. He really explained why it was a special game form, and I realized that one of the reasons I hadn't recognized that is because there weren't games that really brought out for me what he was talking about. And what I really loved about his description, and what I really tried to get in Half Truth, was this egalitarian quality of trivia where you can't always win, but everybody has these knowledge, and it's fun to be able to plumb into those and show them off. And so I thought back to my favorite trivia experiences, and one of them was playing with the family, and my grandmother wouldn't win the games, but she would come out with answers that nobody else got, right? And so that's the quality I really wanted to see in Half Truth.
So I did want to ask before we got more into it, like, how does Half Truth and Half Truth Second Guess differ from, like, say, Trivial Pursuit or something like that? Like, what are, like, the unique mechanics to this game?
Well, that's something I could talk a while about. So in Half Truth, all the questions are multiple choice, and there are 3 correct answers and 3 incorrect answers. And so right away, that addresses something from Trivial Pursuit that I wanted to see, which was everybody gets to play all the questions. So you don't have the frustration of sitting around not knowing anything and thinking that you're the only one at the table who knows. It's not your turn. And so everybody can play all the questions. And the multiple choice made it so that even if you didn't know the answer, you could still guess with a 50-50 chance of getting a correct answer. And rarely is it actually a straight guess, because you can often eliminate one of them, or you've got a hunch about one of them. So you can really draw on whatever you know to give yourself an edge on that guess. And so one of the important design decisions with it was that players, of course, wanted to also be able to make a second and third guess, because if you know all 3 answers, you want to be able to show that off. And rather than making it so that it was guess 1 is 1 point, guess 2 is 5 points, and guess 3 is 100 points, because it gets pretty hard to get all 3. I sort of went the other way, where guess 1, you might call that 5 points. Guess 2, maybe 6. Guess 3 is 7, right? So you're getting these small improvements, and that way it keeps the sort of real experts from being able to just crush everybody with these. Instead, they're getting these small advantages, which will win the game for them in the long run most of the time. But there's this pressing your luck issue, because if they guessed 3 and they got any one of them wrong, they don't get anything.
In terms of the game's accessibility, how difficult would you say it is to understand this new format for trivia? And do you think there are any particular challenges that players can expect to go through?
I think it's dead easy. I think the being multiple choice, and once you understand that principle that is multiple choice, and every question has 3 correct answers, and you get the majority of your points just by getting one of them, I think you understand most of the game. And then I would say the learning curve comes from people will often want to press their luck more than they should, because the questions are really often quite tricky. And one of the nice things about this format, and in fact, this second edition really plays into that, is that there's a lot you can do with these questions. It's surprising how much the questions are like a game that you're designing for your players. And so they're playing these little games every time. And the reason for that is you can see, for example, you can have questions where there's a pretty obvious answer. And so then the question becomes, should you try to take a second or a third? And sometimes there's no obvious answers, but there's some ones that are pretty easy to eliminate. And my favorite part of my favorite quality of these questions is when you can actually get in something where there's not only a theme for what the correct answers are, but there's a theme for the negative answers. So, for example, I think there was one where the question was, which of these are Pokemon? And there were 3 Pokemon, and all the negative answers were weird breeds of dog. So, so when you're looking at it, if you don't know anything about Pokemon, you still might have an edge on the question because you look and you say, well, I know a Labradoodle is a breed of dog. They were, I think, a little more obscure than that, but then that gives the players sort of 2 angles to attack it, maybe from the Pokemon knowledge, but maybe from the breeds of dog knowledge. And once they sort of understand that's part of the game, it gives them a lot of different ways to look at the questions.
Would you say that making the game multiple choice adds to the replayability factor as well?
The questions, I don't think so. No, really, because the thing is, the questions still are only usable once, and so just like most trivia games, when you've seen the question, you're at a pretty big advantage when it comes up again. So yeah, no.
As far as the actual trivia questions themselves, what sort of genres and topics can players expect to see in the 2nd edition?
There's a wide range of topics. One of the things I've stuck to carefully is I don't want specialty version trivia of half-truth. I don't want to see whatever Simpsons half-truth or a Star Wars half-truth. I find that those make good gifts, but they're much harder to get to the table because getting that group of players together that will respond to that is rarer. So instead, I really like to see everything be open for questions. And so and there's some questions so you will see questions not only on like movies and music and art and history, but weird things like popular names in the early 1900s, and then there's all sorts of ways you can do the questions about the music might be, which of these songs has the word discipline in it? And so then there's a bunch of songs and you're trying to run through the lyrics or just take a gut guess based on the title. And one of the first questions I made, so this one is in the original Half-Truth, was which of these are real French sodas? And so the answers were 3 real names, but then the ones that I made, which were fake, were Mademoiselle Pop, Poisson Boisson, and then Cola Sabot, which I think, pardon anybody, don't be offended by my pronunciation, please, or my accent, but I think it meant like hoof drink or bone drink. So that again, even though we hadn't really understood what makes a good question at that point, already there was this idea that you could know it by knowing the actual sodas, by knowing the probable names, or by knowing some French and sort of saying, oh, this fish drink doesn't sound very much like it would be a soda name.
So I wanted to ask you about how you collaborated with Ken Jennings on the game. Like, what was his contributions to to the game as a whole? Did he like contribute like certain questions, or you mentioned that the game itself was inspired by his book, but I was kind of curious, like how involved does the host of Jeopardy get involved in a game like this?
He was a workhorse. The game was fully designed when I brought it to him, in the sense that the framework was done and I had made enough questions that you could play a couple games. I invited him over and we played for an evening. And the first game he won, and the second game he did not. I wasn't playing because I wrote the questions. We had, somebody, the person who won was solid with trivia, but Ken sort of saw that I had that yes, he was the most favored at the table, but he had to really measure how many chances he took in order to do well. And he was hooked after that, and fully on board. And he helped lay the framework for what the distribution of the questions were, how many entertainment, pop, questions of history, that sort of thing. He's written trivia books, so he had a huge wealth of knowledge there, of course. And in the end, I think he wrote more questions than I did, but it's close. We both wrote, and then there were also other contributors, but it's possible that he may have written the most questions that we have.
Another thing that I've always been curious about when it comes to any sort of trivia games, and again, this comes from the fact that
can I just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So one thing that he really brought to the table, people know him as because of his involvement with Jeopardy, and that's how I knew of him as first. But really, how I got to know him was his writing, Brainiac. And since then, I've read every book he's written that I know of, and he is a funny writer. He's a good writer. He's got a great sense of humor, and that was really useful in getting a style guide, and also just injecting humor into them, because we wanted to make, for the most part, for most of the questions, we wanted to make it so that you read through them and you enjoyed the sense of humor, you enjoyed the questions. There's a joy not only in playing trivia, but when somebody really loves it, you really get that feeling as you read the questions. And so I think he brought that to the game.
Well, I think that a really understated part of trivia games in general is the humor. When you go out to like a trivia night or something like that, there's a feel good quality obviously about answering the question correctly, but it's the laughs that come throughout the experience that really drives it home. It's really what separates an okay trivia night from a fantastic trivia night, and I think that's really what's lost at bar trivia and things like that, is people just go and try to jam through a bunch of questions, and that's not all there is to it. It's the entire experience.
I agree completely. And it was surprising how much latitude we found we had for adding humor to this, because you can add in your answers jokes, and they don't ruin the question, right? Like if you see one, oh, that's a joke, then you still, how much does that help you track down the other three? And then the best ones, of course, are where that joke is like, oh, that's a joke, I can eliminate that, but can I? And then you begin to second guess yourself. And so if you can get them in that sweet spot where it's probably a joke, but maybe it isn't, then you have yourself a really engaging question.
I did have one question that I've always been curious about when it comes to trivia in any format, and that's the fact checking. How do you go about and fact check hundreds of different questions, especially in a format like this where you have 3 correct answers and 3 incorrect answers? What's the fact checking process for something like this?
Wow. Yeah. When I first started, we basically independently check not only our own answers but each other's answers, and so we run it through several people. It is, I would say, impossible not for mistakes not to slip through, because there's so many ways that mistakes can come through. Not only just overt mistakes, but also because you can interpret the question a little bit different than you thought. And so the only real answer I have is that we each individually do it, and I think we probably do it more than once. Like I'm sure that my own questions I went through and I fact checked more than once. I went top to bottom and you just went through them, and I did that for Ken's questions as well. And the other part of the fact checking, it's related, is how do you make them endure? So for example, if you have an actor and you ask which of these actors have been in movies that have color in the title, like purple or white, that may be fact checked when you make the question, but then by the time the game comes out or a couple years later, who knows? Keanu Reeves might be in a color movie and you didn't plan for it. And so then there's a question. It's like, do you want to just swallow that and say that's some of the questions are going to age, or do you want to make the questions of 2024, or do you want to have finished acting because they're they have retired or passed away? I think you do a mix of all those, because there's just too many fun questions that you would. At first, I was trying to be very careful about that, but in the end, having some questions age was worth it because the questions were just that much fun.
Yeah, no, of course. Before we wrap things up, you are the creator of Magic the Gathering, and it feels like a missed opportunity if I didn't ask you at least one question about Magic. So I hope you indulge me here. Have you been following the recent controversy involving Commander at all?
I have not. I have a good relationship with Wizards. I was participating in design of new sets every few years, but but I haven't done that for like 7 years, and I'm completely checked out now. I'd be happy. I can answer questions about. I know that there's some issues going on with collectability and rarity of cards and reprints and things like that, but I don't know the details. In general, though, I am very much in favor of players being able to play with what they want and having access to the cards they want. I'm not a supporter of traders who are speculating an old product. That's okay, but I don't want that speculation to impact the players. I want them to. So one way I used to put that was ability like stamp, where stamps might go up in value or they might not, but you can always get a stamp.
Yeah. Well, you did kind of touch on something that I figured I can get a follow-up question from. You mentioned it's been several years since you've actually designed any Magic sets or anything like that. Do you ever think that you'll ever come back to the game or eventually, go back and design a new set? Or do you think that your time with Magic is about wrapped up?
That could go either way. Personally, I'd like to, although it has to designs that I'm very interested in, and so anytime I take a new design project, it's costing me some design somewhere else. But I love the contact with Magic. I love designing for Magic. It is so much fun, and it is so much easier than designing for a new game. With a new game, I'm constantly sort of second guessing myself about what's fun, what the audience is, whether it's got long-term appeal or not. With Magic, there's so many experts at the game that they can immediately appreciate you, immediately know if you've got a winner with a card design or a mechanic or something like that. And that is gratifying. And you've got this audience immediately. So there's nothing like designing for Magic. And yeah, I'd love to design if it works out in the future.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Well, I think that is a perfect way to end things. Thank you so much for talking with us, Richard. We really appreciate it. We can't wait to get our hands on Half Truth Second Guess. As a big trivia fan and a big fan of yours, I think it sounds like the perfect game. So, anyways, as you heard, October 15th is the launch date. Be sure to check it out if you want a trivia game designed by Richard Garfield and Ken Jennings. Who could ask for anything better than that? Until next time, thank you so much for watching Above the Table. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave comments, tell your friends about this brand new YouTube channel. You can expect lots more content like this in the future. Until next time, thank you so much for watching.